Hello, welcome to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 49, our first episode of the new year. Happy New Year to everyone. And Kyler Cheatham is with me as always. Kyler, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Great to have our first episode underway here. And we've got an exciting show. And by the way, if you're new to this podcast, this is the podcast about digital transformation. Everything related to digital transformation and business transformation is what we cover here. People, process, technology, strategy, all that stuff, plus more. You can find new episodes every Wednesday on YouTube, LinkedIn, as well as all the audio podcast platforms, Google, Spotify, Apple, Amazon, etc. So it's a new year, new trends in the market, new things to think about as we look to the future of 2022 and start to execute or plan for the years, I should say. And you have a number of hot topics that you've uncovered here over the last couple of weeks over the holidays leading into the new year, Kyler. So what do you have for us today?
Yeah. Something that I've noticed with a lot of the technology-based content, obviously with the start of the new year, we're talking about a lot of trend-specific content, but there's been some new terms that I kind of wanted to unpack with you today that at least I have never really heard of and referred to in such context. So the first one I want to start with is technical debt. A lot of that we talk about when we integrate a Band-Aid or a short-term solution, as opposed to a long-term or a larger digital transformation or enterprise resource planning software option, we build up what's called technical debt. And it's an kind of imperfect short-term solution that needs to be solved in the interim, so thus collecting quote unquote debt. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to kind of just pick your brain about kind of that technical debt, because I assume that's something that you work with at our client community a lot at Third Stage here. Yeah,
we hear it a lot from certainly industry analysts use that term a lot, and even clients. We hear a lot of clients that refer to their own technical debt that they're trying to solve, and typically they're referring to just basically, for lack of a better term, or just to simplify it a bit, it's really just getting behind in technology. So you've fallen behind, you haven't done upgrades, you're using outdated technologies, and meanwhile, technology is changing and evolving and getting better and improving and providing more opportunity, but you as an organization have not kept up. And so that's typically what people are referring to when they talk about technical debt.
Definitely. And is that something that, because usually debt correlates to more of a financial term, but what I learned from a lot of this research is it actually isn't always financial, although you may invest in a larger IT team to handle that, or different integrations to make sure that all of these different systems are able to do things like data management or data sharing, that type of thing. But it's actually about having this kind of surplus of about a bunch of random systems. Is that right?
Yeah, it's a surplus of random systems that oftentimes aren't tied together, or they create data silos, which I remember from a couple episodes ago, you were accusing me of being a data siloer, if I remember correctly. So there's data silos, process silos that are created, and certainly just technological advancements that you're missing out on by having these disparate, outdated systems. I do think, though, it's I always, as you know, and as we've talked about many times on the show, I'm a skeptic when it comes to buzzwords, and that term technical debt, I have to think comes from the vendor and industry analyst community, because it almost makes it sound as though it's something you have to do or you have to pay back.
Right.
And, and that's, to your point about it usually being a financial related thing. I think that's a vendor way of saying, if you're not investing in technology, you're falling behind and you're going to owe it back someday anyway. So you might as well just buy the technology now. I mean, that's kind of what I hear if I unpack it or try to interpret what the meaning is. Yeah. But not every company, has that. I think it's sort of I don't want to say fear mongering, but it's kind of a fear mongering term that would suggest that any organization that isn't on the current system of the latest and greatest is falling behind and they owe it. They're going to have to pay it back, that debt somehow. And that's not necessarily true. So that's my Debbie Downer moment for the time being on that term.
No, that's good. That's good insight, though, because it is something, it does kind of sound a little daunting or negative when you kind of read about it as an organization. You're like, oh, I have, technical debt. And sometimes that isn't always meaning that you need to buy a new software system. As we've talked about a few weeks ago, really integrations are becoming a future trend when it comes to utilizing different specialty systems. And that brings me to my next key trend that I saw was just a common language when it comes to integrating these best of breed systems or specialized systems. So I wanted to kind of get your reaction to that, because I know you help a lot of our clients integrate best of breed systems or like a CRM system versus, an HCM system, those types of things, specifically specialty supply chain or manufacturing, those types of things. And just knowing that they will need a quote unquote common language to integrate with other areas or to be able to share other areas, even when we're like categorizing a customer or a user, those labels have to be essentially the same in order to do things like automate. So I wondered if you could kind of give us your reaction to, do you think that's kind of where we're going to more of creating a common language versus a whole ERP system, and utilizing that more best of breed approach for each kind of leg or department of an organization?
I think so. I think I don't know that just like every topic we discuss on this show, there is no one size fits all answer. And I wouldn't say, broadly or generally that is a trend that's going to apply to everyone at some point in the future. But I do think there's a lot of merit in the best of breed model. 20 years ago, it was kind of frowned upon, I feel like, or 10 to 20 years ago, it seemed sort of frowned upon because it was so difficult to integrate systems and it was creating more problems than it was solving in many cases. But I think now with the integration tools and this common language that you're talking about and just the flexibility of technology now, typically that enables more of a best of breed model. And I think it also points to the fact that, there's always going to be, in my opinion, a push and pull or a tension between the benefits of a single ERP system, which are that it's one single unified system for the most part, that can integrate all the modules together, all the data is in one place. But it can't be everything to everyone within any given organization. And the benefit of best of breed is that with best of breed, you can go out and find the best technologies for any given function or business process, and then, not have to settle for any deficiencies that a more general, broader ERP system might have. But now you've created more pressure. There's more need to create the integration and make sure you have data management well defined and all that stuff. So there's pros and cons to either side, but I think it's sort of like a pendulum swing. There's always going to be pushing and pulling to either side. There's pros and cons to either side, and a lot of it just comes down to where you are as an organization, what your priorities are, and figuring out if best of breed is a good model. But I would say, though, in general, we see a lot more viable best of breed transformations now than we did 5, 10, 20 years ago, for sure. So it does seem to be a trend that's evolving, but I'm always skeptical of any sort of trend that is going to overtake the world and become the one answer for organizations. I think there's just too many options out there to oversimplify that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the business technologist in me thinks, yeah, of course, why wouldn't you want to have a system that does everything so specialized for each area of the organization? That seems like a value. But then when you think about actually what it takes to create this common language and the strategic alignment you need behind it, really the organizational change you need behind it, so each department isn't that siloed type of structure, and you change this behavior. So it seems like that's a lot more of a significant undertaking than just plugging something in and the data will just magically flow through.
Yeah, it's very true, and that's why the whole discipline of system architecture, integration, data management, that whole bucket of technical stuff is becoming more and more important and in higher demand, because you have more systems that are proliferating throughout the technical landscape, and more organizations are relying on multiple systems. And it can work very nicely as long as you have a clear integration plan, a clear architecture strategy, and data management plan. But a lot of companies sort of overlook that piece of it, or they oversimplify what it's going to take to address those areas. And that should be something you bake into your transformation plan, because that's going to take a lot of time and effort. And that, quite frankly, is probably going to be on the critical path, that whole integration and architecture piece of it.
Yeah, I actually saw an article that talked about that system architecture role will be one of the top most coveted roles in the technology sector for 2022. Just being able
Hmm.
to do that. But the piece that actually surprised me about that was obviously you need some technical skills and just knowing about that overall, like whether it's like Java based or anything like that when it comes to coding. So you need that technical skill set. But the article I saw at least talked about the importance of identifying a person that can work across the organization, that has high emotional intelligence, that really you wouldn't always stereotypically put those in kind of a technology based role. So these
Okay.
types of people need to be able to understand and collaborate with people across the entire organization.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it is a good point. You bring up a really good point in that it's not just a technology discussion or a technology issue. It's also, you certainly are looking at APIs and integration between systems. You're looking at data management. You're looking at the general architecture and how it all ties together from a technology perspective, but you also should be looking at the business integration too. And I think that's what you're alluding to, sort of that functional architecture, that functional integration of, how are you going to architect your business? How are your end-to-end business processes going to come together? And ultimately, how can the technology support that?
Yeah, and making sure that your overall business community or your internal teams are aware of how critical it is to make sure that you're from back to our category type of example, to make sure that you are implementing data correctly, or it becomes completely irrelevant and unvaluable because it can't be consumed by any other systems within the organization. I don't think a lot of people that aren't maybe in a technical position really realize the importance of that, or making that behavior shift, how significant that can be on these types of roles.
Yeah, I agree for sure. There's a lot of layers to unpack within everything you're talking about there.
Yeah, definitely. So speaking of layers, the next thing I want to talk about is the metaverse. So for those of of our audience like me that has no idea what this is, can you explain the metaverse to us before I kind of go over it?
Actually, I can't. I don't know a lot about what exactly the metaverse means. Does this have anything to do with Facebook Meta, or is this totally different?
Well, Facebook has invested in the metaverse. They're one of the few companies that have kind of taken stake with it. So this article talked about how the metaverse is really kind of a digital reality, talking about social media, online gaming, augmented reality, virtual reality, and cryptocurrencies, and that kind of allows the user to find all of this in one location or one interaction.
Hmm.
So it talks about, how only a few companies have really taken stake in it, and that's Facebook's on that list, Spotify's on that list, Zoom is actually on that list. And then how it will kind of change the overall consumption of technology through like AR glasses and wearables would be an example of that too. So it affects a lot of technology sectors, especially kind of the newer pieces like the collaborative productivity, like Canva. We use Canva here at Third Stage, Slack, those types of things that are about collaborating across a digital ecosystem. So that's kind of what that meant. The other one that was interesting was the NTF platforms. So what that will look like as far as growth, and that can be kind of a hybrid example of both kind of in-person and digital options. Like for example, they gave a property may come online and a virtual real estate agent would be able to, or even a bot would be able to chat with the customer, or it could pre-qualify them in a different way without taking any sort of face-to-face interaction, and that could all be automated. So kind of an interesting trend we're kind of talking about, outside of normal core digital transformation, just technology
Yeah,
evolution.
more emerging technology type stuff.
Mhm.
What does NTF stand for? Just for those that aren't familiar with that acronym,
It stands for non-fungible token.
which is the underlying technology of
Yes.
cryptocurrency.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah,
Yep.
it's
So
in
it's
it.
like it's like a computer code and data that conveys ownership of something. You know, you talked about, have you ever heard of like people buying a virtual art painting for like millions of dollars, which to me that doesn't make a ton of sense, but obviously there is a market out there for being able to take cryptocurrencies or actually own something via a digital environment. So
yeah, that's and that also ties back to blockchain as well. I think that's all sort of tied together. The NFT, I think I said NTF, I meant NFT and blockchain, I think are very interrelated. Back to this metaverse thing though. So when you look at that metaverse, are there any use cases of how you talked about Zoom and Facebook and some of these other companies that are on the leading edge of metaverse type stuff? But what are there use cases of how it's being used or how they envision it being used in the future? Just to like, because to me, it seems super high level conceptual, and I'm not seeing how, like blockchain and NFT, that's more, you know, you've got more tangible use cases. And by the way, we're going to have a guest on next week that's going to talk about fintech and financial technologies, such as cryptocurrency and blockchain and whatnot. So if you're interested in that topic, we'll unpack that more with our guest next week. But are there specific examples within the world of metaverse of how that's being used or how it could be used in the future?
I know I like to put you on the spot, but when you do that to me, it's not. I'm just
how the tables have turned.
Yeah, right. No, I'm just kidding. So what I can describe, and we'd love to hear from our audience if we do have any experts out there, because obviously we're still learning about this as we kind of unpack the future trends. But it seems like it provides access. So it's like a virtual space that provides access to entertainment, to projects, opportunity to work, those types of things. It's like a convenience of consumption and a frictionless access to service. So that's kind of from a top level. It still sounds kind of high level. I can't find, you know, exactly of a specific example, but it seems like a lot of, you know, the tech giant, especially in the gaming area, will continue to kind of build this out. So if our audience has any more information about it, we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, no, that's good stuff. Really interesting.
Yeah, definitely. And the other kind of cool thing that I looked at was talking about the food and beverage industry specifically and what their kind of customer integration technology looks like. Because obviously we've seen with the COVID-19 pandemic, we've had to go to contactless, and food and beverage, as you talk about in a lot of your content, has really been one of the industries that has had to go through a transformation in order to survive, because their face-to-face business model was literally not available to them for a long time. So that kind of sparked this new innovation. Specifically, Taco Bell has a new Defy store design. And if you have a second to Google that, anyone listening, it's super cool. It has 4 drive-through lanes that are dedicated to delivery pickups or mobile orders. And basically you scan a QR code and your food will be delivered via contactless priority lift system. So think about like when you go to the bank and kind of you have that transport system between you and the teller. That's kind of what that looks like, is you don't have any contact with an order taker or anything like that. And that's kind of been a trend specifically in technology, like Bite Ninja also launched this in 2021, and it actually outsources drive-through operations through like gig workers from home. So basically you're actually ordering from someone that's not in the restaurant, but they're passing that order to whomever's preparing the food, and you pick it up. So very interesting kind of how that's evolved in just the overall food and beverage technology specifically, because we hadn't seen a whole lot of movement in that industry. You know, you do have kind of the POS systems that are more mobile, you can pay at the table, those types of things, kiosks, but now really kiosks have evolved to, you know, your iPhone is actually, or whatever smart device you're utilizing is how you order. And then you really don't interact with much employees. So definitely a shift in automation, AI, machine learning, those types of things as well for food and beverage.
Yeah, it's interesting. And it's a good reminder of how the pandemic has really forced organizations into these sorts of digital transformations, or at least the smart ones have figured out how to use technology to navigate this environment. But also, even once the pandemic's over and we're not so concerned about human contact and health and safety and whatnot, not that we'll ever stop being concerned, but what I mean, won't be as concerning. These technologies will help even in that environment too. So it's really interesting to see that. And the other thing, you mentioned one little thing that triggered a sort of a memory or thought, which is that, those mobile payments in the United States, as far as having the servers that'll just come over and take your credit card right at the table, print out a receipt, you sign it or whatever, right there on the spot. That's been around in Europe forever. Like I remember traveling to Europe and like 10 years ago and seeing that technology there. But then you come to the United States and they were still doing it the old school way of taking their credit card to the back to one central credit card processing machine and, kind of scanning it and everything. So it's just kind of a reminder that like that technology has been around forever, but the pandemic has sort of forced the U.S. companies, the U.S. food and restaurant companies to catch up in that regard. And I'm sure there's many other examples of that throughout the world.
Definitely. And kind of transforming food and beverage industries or businesses to really look at things that they wouldn't typically look at, like big data. For example, when you utilize Grubhub or DoorDash, those third-party delivery services, the business that actually gives that a piece of that commission to that third party, they have no access to that customer data. So they have no idea how to, use that for business intelligence. So there's been a lot of other platforms that have kind of launched it as more of a hub. So you can pay a subscription fee as opposed to a commission and utilize the customer data, but the platform still kind of showcases how you can deliver an order through that. So lots of really interesting things there, but you wouldn't really see that as a main priority before pre-COVID-19. Because people walk into the restaurants and it was pretty traditional business model, and now it's kind of really taken a digital strategy to be successful within the restaurant industry.
Yeah, it also reminds me of that whole omni-channel movement that had been happening already in the retail space, where you could, they could track what you're buying in store versus what you're buying online, and they made it semi-seamless to sort of return stuff in a store if you bought it online or vice versa. So it's things like that where I think it's sort of again the pandemic and just this disruption we're seeing in the world is sort of forcing or accelerating those sorts of trends like that.
Absolutely. And something else we've kind of seen is bigger companies, big tech giants, specifically in the software space, trying to acquire different sort of industry niche businesses or platforms, I should say. Like Oracle right now is looking to buy, as everyone knows, kind of in the industry, for $30 billion, an electronic medical records company, which would be, a really big kind of merger into the healthcare sphere. And I know, Eric, you know a lot kind of more about that than I do, but do you think that's kind of along the same lines of trying to kind of acquire those niche pieces of solution, like we were talking about earlier, specifically in an emerging market like healthcare?
Yeah, I mean, you look at, again, what industries have been most impacted by the pandemic and what industries are most likely to have sort of forced acceleration of technology adoption on them, and healthcare is certainly one of them. We talked about food and bev, we talked about retail, but healthcare is another one. I think it's a smart move for Oracle to buy Cerner, and I think that's that's sort of Oracle's model, is they go out and buy these really successful companies. They did it with Siebel and PeopleSoft and JD Edwards. NetSuite was probably the more recent big one that they had. And so I think I read that Cerner that's the biggest acquisition that Oracle's ever made. I think I saw that correctly, even bigger than the NetSuite acquisition. So it's a pretty big deal, and clearly they're doubling down on the whole healthcare industry and that whole movement and need to digitize. What? Digitize? How do you say that? Digitize. I don't know why I have trouble with that word. Yeah, so healthcare is trying to digitize, just like a lot of other industries are.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, speaking of digitize, right, or new markets, today we kind of talked about it at the beginning, but third stage is moving into more of the African market. So in Africa, I know we're planning on opening an office there, or we already have, and it's a newer office. And we kind of talked about what that means in our upcoming interview with you and Adam, as Adam manages a lot of that business and we've worked together kind of create those partnerships. But I wanted to talk about Africa specifically because it's really been on the news headlines about how businesses there are utilizing technology, and the really homegrown type of systems or solutions that are needed to support that area when we talk about things like connectivity. For example, in Africa, as you guys know, mobile numbers are really people's identifying data, really. So when we talk about, do they have an email address? Not everyone does, but they all have some sort of SMS, and it's really critical to reaching the majority of African consumers who own a basic phone rather than a smartphone. And then what that looks like, and I didn't know this, but maybe you did, and about 98% of subscribers in Africa use prepaid mobile phone plans, which a lot of our softwares here in the US or a lot of our global enterprise software doesn't have those features anymore.